Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hopefully my children don't come in. They're downstairs laughing about farting, so.
Nice. I'm surprised I've never used this before.
I've used it with one of my last freelance clients. Now that I'm on it, I recognize it.
And as people add, it just slices the screen up.
What's that?
As more people join, it slices the screen up.
Well, you like how you can see me. The other person, you'll just see them in the same way.
Hot there?
What's that?
Is it hot there?
Yeah, it was like 92 today. But we went to Assateague and it was the heatiest I've ever seen it, to the point that the stand was blowing so hard it hurt. Is it hot there?
Yeah, it was about 95 to 100 today.
Yikes.
I had to go downtown for lunch.
Like a personal or a business?
Just kind of a networking lunch.
What's the downtown Houston like?
Lots of high rises, lots of businesses. You know.
That's really specific.
I mean, there's no real like living scene there, you know. I mean,
that's a nice picture of Sammy and Austin from a while ago.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Zhao.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good.
Good.
Appreciate you giving us some of your time. We're definitely honored, and hope we can use it as efficiently as possible. Obviously, speaking here is Jeff, and my sister Amanda is on with us as well. Certainly kind of exceeded my expectations on reaching out to you on Twitter. That thought might just get a couple responses via email back. So definitely appreciate you setting this up.
Yeah, no problem. I happened to find you tweeting about Warren in basically, and then so anyway, that's kind of a start of the conversation. So no problem. So happy to basically chat about it.
Okay. We can take this any direction you want to go. If you want us to kind of do quick intros, and we can go down that path, or again, sent you the deck. We certainly kind of get it that it's just an idea right now, and neither of us have kind of gone down this path before. So both of us parents kind of started the idea as we chatted about how we found things for our kids and saw kind of what was done in our communities, and both of us are at I guess times in our lives now where we want to try something different, call it midlife crises or what have you, but kind of both at the point where have the flexibility work-wise and kind of just a mindset that wanted to try something different. This is an idea we came up with, and that's kind of like I said, where it stands today as an idea. But we think that if executed well, that it could be a decent idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you tell me a little bit about why you came up with the idea? Basically, just tell me a little bit about the origin of the idea.
Mandy, why don't you start?
For me, so I'm a transplant to the Bay Area, and we moved out there when my daughter was really young, and I found it really hard to kind of connect with my community as a parent for activities for her. And then after moving out there, had a second daughter kind of really close afterwards. But I live in Berkeley, and there are so many conversations that I have in the social circles I'm in, which is mostly other parents and parents of kind of young to like teenage kids, of like what are the activities our kids are doing, and then trying to coincide schedules so that our kids are together. And it's amazing the amount of time I feel like I spend as a parent trying to organize my kids' schedules and the things that they do in our community, whether it's fun things that they do or educational things they do. So I typically kind of do, Google searches or Berkeley Parents Network or 510 Families, but I'm on so many different platforms to find out what's going on sort of like a week-to-week basis, and then on a like plan ahead basis, let's say for camps or activities that they would do year-round. It's so time-consuming. So Jeff and I kind of started just talking about what we do in our different areas, and there were some similarities with some platforms that we're both on that we just felt like lacked the cohesion of one platform where we could access everything we would want to for our kids.
Got it. And so a lot of these are, is it basically, what type of activities? Is it play dates? Is it parent-to-parent play dates? Is it basically group activity where you don't know the other parents, the other children? Basically what type of activity? Is it like activities like at for example, the YMCA, where basically, parents and children are mostly strangers, or is it basically, among, friends of friends and friends?
I'd say the initial conversation that Jeff and I started with were activities that are more kind of organized activities, and his are going to be a little different than mine because my kids are a little bit younger than his. But for me, it's camps, like all summer long, kids, when they're not in school, they're doing camps all summer long. And then year round, it's either sports or art, kind of creative activities that they do. So things where I am sometimes meeting with other parents, and then sometimes it's just as I see my children being interested in different types of things, I try to sort of take it beyond what they get at school. So it's multiple things. But Jeff, for you, it's a little different, right?
Yeah. Let me jump in. Like Mandy said, my kids are a little bit older, and I came at it from a very similar angle in that I moved to Houston a few years ago. As we look for activities for our kids, you started to need, many platforms. But my son, just as an example, is athletic, plays basketball, plays football. So as he kind of progressed, and I started to look for individual training for him, whether it be basketball or as a quarterback, a lot of it was word of mouth. A lot of it was just kind of randomly coming on guys that did this type of training where, my son does one-on-one basketball training as an example. That's typically $40 to $60 an hour in this area. There's, certainly 3 to 5 guys that I've come across that, you really couldn't find in any search functionality. And I know these guys, having kind of got to know them, would love to grow their customer base, love to grow their business, but it's really a word of mouth network, so to speak. And just to give you an example of, one of the gentlemen that my son coaches with, I live in this large master plan community, and, just conversations with him, we said, hey, why don't we try to, we have a local basketball court covered pavilion in our neighborhood. Why don't we try to arrange some group training for the neighborhood down here at this court? We'll go Mondays and Wednesdays. So just on this very inefficient Facebook group page that I created, I had 100 people join, and we get, between 10 and 20 kids down there every Monday and Wednesday that pay this guy $20 an hour to group train. So he makes between $200 and $400 an hour on a kind of opportunity that really, there's no platform to create that type of get together. So again, we think there's a way to monetize it, given it's good for the supply side and it's good for the demand side.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, I get the context. I guess, what questions do you have for me? Basically, basically you've kind of seen my background a little bit. The biggest app I did was, Farmville. We sold it to Zynga. You know, it grew to half a billion users from the one and two, and then I've invested in a bunch of app as well as enterprise companies. So I know both the consumer as well as the enterprise kind of as well as the B2B space. So
Right.
you know what you know what do you want to know? So
So I mean, just to kick off, I guess, as we think about turning this from an idea into, executing, kind of reference this in one of our exchanges. I mean, do you think it's best to start kind of very small geographically and build out through concentric circles, so to speak, and kind of prove up that, we can get both the supply side as well as get kind of user growth? Or is there a different kind of method that you would?
yeah, yeah. Actually, that's exactly right. I'm curious a little bit. How did you where did you basically happen upon that? I'm curious. Basically, yeah,
The concentric circles?
yeah,
Really just, I mentioned that I had shown the slide deck to one other friend, and his advice was start small. So, outside of that advice and just kind of outside of, I think, any business, you want to prove up that you can kind of execute and, start small and kind of not swallow more than you can, bite off more than you can swallow. Really the connection of those two things at the end of the day, I guess. I mean, it's just kind of obvious to me that we would start small. I don't think
okay, yeah,
I don't think we would want to bite off too much early on. And again, this is something where I do have some money I can put into, the development side. And, clearly as Mandy and I think about this, I kind of think of her as product, myself as business, and then we certainly need to bring in somebody to help us on the tech side of things.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Um, so yeah, that's exactly right. Basically, so most of the social businesses start in concentric circles. It's not even just basically chewing off. It's not even basically taking more than you can handle. It's actually how it's executed. So you basically would see multiple companies in the same space with the exact same idea, and the company that operates in concentric circles usually wins, despite funding, despite everything. It's because there's a tightness of community that has to basically be generated between the supply side and the demand side, and it has to be a circle. You have to basically, for lack of a better word, you have to basically make sure, um, you know, in war analogies, you have to take that small hill first before you take another one. In or some other analogies, you have to basically make sure you consecutively heat up different areas. So the way basically Yelp and Nextdoor basically did it is they focus on the supply side, and they basically made sure they acquired the supply. Basically, you want a bait, that the demand will basically come for the bait, basically. So, and you want to basically make it so that, it's easy to get and so forth. So, and so the nature of the bait depends on the nature of demand. So in Yelp's case, they focus on dense, high quality reviews in restaurants, basically in San Francisco. And I mean, this may sound obvious, but it's actually not what the competitor companies did. Basically, the competitor companies basically one company ran display ads all over the web. Another company basically took out Super Bowl ads. And the one that won is the one you've heard of, Yelp. Basically, and there's many other competitors. That it wasn't just the two. Um, and then they basically went to San Bruno, San Mateo's, Burlingame, all across the Bay Area, and they just basically made sure they had a recipe that that took about 6 months to basically roll out for any given area. Basically they would basically go into the area, drop in people, develop evangelists in that area. These evangelists would basically carry the ball forward, develop parties and so forth to basically kind of spread the area. And so they had a repeated playbook that they knew, as long as it starts rolling and it starts executing, they would basically be able to execute for a given area. So, and that's how Uber, that's how TaskRabbit, all of these companies basically rolled out. And so the key first is basically what is the supply side? What is the supply side? What is the nature of the supply side? What is the metadata around it that enables trust, safety, whatever it basically is. So for Nextdoor, it was basically government. They basically took, regional government alerts, information from, San Mateo and Palo Alto, and they basically got those alerts and basically used it as the initial hook, so that people basically got effectively notified. And then they basically added additional features once they were there. So now it looks like a community. And so the nature of it could be, basically, obviously you want basically these sports camps and so forth, but how do you basically enhance frequency? How do you basically enhance trust? How do you basically, Amazon has a lot of different ways to basically enhance trust on the platform, all the metadata around it, and then how do you basically enhance, whatever it is that you basically want, basically if it's anonymous, semi-anonymous, transactions like a group pickup game, or or further kind of a more intimate social connections among parents that need a play date, or whatever it basically is. You have to basically think those things through. How do we get the first stage of the supply? How does it attract this first stage of the demand? And then how do we basically attract the second stage of supply, and how do we attract the second stage of demand? And how do you make it so that one area, it can basically be a town, it can be a city, basically one area is lit up, and then it's rolling. It's a community that's alive, and then you basically roll it to another community, and then you try to basically figure out, okay, well, how do we basically roll it to Austin? How do we roll it to Berkeley? Or do you start in Berkeley? Or basically it's not clear basically where you started and so forth. But that and a lot of supply side is recruited hand by hand. Basically it's very similar to basically how Travis and Garrett Camp, basically the founders of Uber, basically they basically manually called a lot of the supply side.
Right.
Basically so it's basically just sales basically, and then in terms of outsourcing, basically a lot of these basically you want to make sure your development. Look, engineers are pretty costly, basically. So you want to make sure, obviously. So the way people basically do it now is they basically make sure they have a prototype that's non-buggy, and it's outsourced. So basically even Uber's was actually outsourced. Basically, I think it was like a friend of his, from Mexico, basically, and then a lot of these things are outsourced initially. You eventually have to rewrite it and bring it back in, because basically, the code gets messed up and so forth. But by the time you bring it back in, you can basically afford to basically invest in it a little bit more.
Right.
And then I would basically think about the cash flow and how to structure this company. Right now, on demand is actually super unpopular. Basically in the venture industry. So basically a lot of people basically in the last 3 or 4 years got burned with the Uber for X. Basically once Uber got popular, then everyone started basically saying, I'm going to do on demand for XYZ. First it was TaskRabbit for X, and when Uber got big, it was that, and Airbnb for that.
Right.
And so I think conceptually, when I think about the idea, homeschooling, basically, parenting and a lot of these platforms, basically, they need a place to reside, a community basically to reside on. So conceptually, it basically makes sense. Um, for fundraising, it's a little bit tricky, basically, beyond the initial stages. And even beyond that, basically, most of the best businesses, I'm not sure if you've basically seen, basically, there's research done on amount of venture funding versus outcome to the founders. And typically it's inversely correlated,
Right.
basically, and in fact, basically, the best outcomes are the ones where the founders actually were able to generate cash early, basically, and use it to basically build the company, and then the venture round in the later rounds are basically a cash out round. So it looks like they raise money, but it's actually it's kind of a head fake.
Right.
And and so, so I would basically think through the business model, the cash flow, basically, the venture environment is what it is. You might be able to get funding, basically, but you would have to knock a lot of doors, basically. Yeah. So, there was a company that was basically, that did $1 million in annual revenue, that was doing basically like shuttles, on-demand shuttles, basically, so for ski trips and so forth, and it's growing reasonably fast, not super fast, but reasonably fast. It got rejected by 100 VCs. It's a friend of mine basically led them around, and so he basically said it was terrifying to be leading it, and had no other VCs basically follow on.
Right.
And so, that's just basically an example basically of how, but I don't necessarily think that's indicative of what VCs invest in is not necessarily always indicative of what is actually needed. So so I don't think it's the same thing.
Right. Now you I imagine see a lot of decks, see a lot of ideas out there. Is there something that fits this need that you are aware of or have seen and has failed?
Yeah. So there's this trend, basically, it fits in the educational tech trend that I've seen. Basically what's happening is, parents are more attentive to their kids than, in previous generations. Basically the previous generations, were either immigrants basically to the U.S. or basically, just came off the GI Bill, basically, or whatever, basically, and they weren't as focused on their kids and the development of kids as these generations. So in terms of basically, so what I've noticed is basically a lot of people had stepped up their activities, both in homeschooling, basically, so platforms like ABC Mouse, basically, there's a couple of them, basically, there's like one or two of them, basically ABC Mouse is one of them, and then Osmo, basically, as well as all these camps, both summer enrichment camps and so forth, and so it's, so it's I definitely see this proliferation of interest in the area. There's something there, and there's also basically this trend toward homeschooling, where basically, I've noticed basically with certain VCs, actually they're starting to homeschool their kids, basically, and where they put them in private school, they don't like it, they put them in public school, it's not quite right, and then they're basically homeschooling and basically developing home curriculums. And so these things are basically just a combination of these. So so I've seen basically enrichment activities as well as homeschooling, as well as, it's just the overall, call it, it's not even educational tech, it's like learning tech. I distinguish it a little bit. Basically educational tech is basically more technology focused on the schools, basically, whereas learning tech is more like, enrichment activities that are basically slightly outside, like Coursera, Udacity, and so
Right.
forth. So I've seen. I'm not a parent myself, so but even as I'm thinking about having kids, I'm thinking about these things. So so I don't have the visceral need. So I don't, me personally, I don't know the nature of the demand, basically as much as probably you guys are, intimately aware of it, basically, but, I do see it with my friends and other people around me.
Right, right.
And I see this overall trend.
Right, and I am a big believer in the buzzwords of the day in tech, right? Whether it's artificial intelligence or machine learning, deep learning, autonomous, whatever. I think there is this trend where, at least me, we're at this inflection point. You look out 5 or 7 years, and it's going to be much more difficult to get a job for any kid coming out of school, college, et cetera, because I think the labor force continues to shrink. So, big picture, longer term, but, a platform or exchange that allows children to experience more things as they're younger, try different things out, almost have, to your point, kind of a platform where you can kind of create your own education in life, could be a market for that given the macro dynamics that I mentioned.
Yeah, and I actually firmly believe that. So basically, I mean, one of my guilty pleasures is basically watching America's Got Talent. Basically, it's kind of a silly show, but it's. But one of the things I've observed is that the kids are getting younger and younger, basically, in America's Got Talent. And not only are the acts, are the voices basically becoming, they learn everything on YouTube, and also the acts are becoming more and more creative, and they remix things from other cultures and other things. And then I talked about this with a friend, and he basically observed this. He watches Shark Tank, and then he observes the same thing in Shark Tank. The people are getting younger and younger, and it's so if you think about the role of school as preparing for one stage for another until to the point you can specialize in something. Basically, so elementary school is preparing for junior high is preparing for high school is preparing for college, and then you specialize, and then graduate school you further specialize, and then work is apprenticeship. Basically that model is a model basically where people could not reach the specialized education, basically of before, basically. So I would say basically nowadays you can basically reach whatever specialized education you basically want, whether it's trading, whether it's whatever basically whatever it is, you can basically reach it very, very early. And you can basically have like, if you start at 14, you can basically have like, 5 years of experience, by the time you turn 19.
Right.
And, so I do think there's this overall trend, and parents that recognized it are already taking advantage of it through these, but in informal ad hoc ways. Basically they're just like collecting a bunch of YouTube videos and then sending their kids to Coursera and Udacity.
Right.
And
right.
So the challenge, is kind of, in a given market, you kind of have to make sure you enter the problem right, basically, and make sure it's the right metaphor, basically, what is the metaphor? What is the use case? It's, you just have to basically make sure, there's an overall trend, but, is it TaskRabbit? Is it an Nextdoor? Is it a Uber? All those platforms basically have subtle dynamics between the supply side and the demand side that basically make it work.
Right. I'm just curious, the challenges fundraising on some of these demand models that you mentioned, is that driven by just difficulty monetizing those user bases? kind of user growth without revenue growth, or just kind of some high profile deals that went awry?
High profile deals that went awry, basically, and so the venture model is kind of strange, basically like so basically like the seed VCs look only 3 years out. And so they basically look at whether it's implicit or not implicit, they look for companies that the Series A and Series B guys will basically bite at, basically. And so right now they're starting to basically be, it already started happening maybe year and a half ago, 2 years ago, basically where the Uber for Access basically, got very tired because basically the Series A, Series B guys started really disliking funding such high burn rates. Basically in promise in search of a business model, and so what you basically saw in the area is you basically saw like the analogy is not quite playing out, the Uber for X or Uber for Y, and then I had a company that pitched me on Uber for cookies or something, basically, and it had $1 million, $2 million run rate, and which would have been fine as a standalone business, and but as a venture business, I think he literally pitched 40 VCs and got shut down, and it was a seed round. It was not even basically Series A round. So
right.
basically, it's this. It's almost like the story has to fit in within the narrative, basically of what people are semi-interested in. So right now, basically like, deep learning is hot, crypto is semi-hot. You have 50% of the people basically skeptics, 50%, still in it. So there are certain areas that are controversial that people will basically, but in general, basically the V space says people like to see large volatility. So they like to basically see something that basically can go all the way, basically to the, this for consumers. Someone likes to basically imagine that this can be a $10 billion company.
Right.
So it's the problem with basically a partner at the firm is they have to basically make that case to the other partner. They have to sell it internally, and so that becomes the problem. Is the narrative basically becomes higher? They can't sell it internally, or they don't even want to, and they can't sell it to their LPs, or they don't want to, and it becomes like, okay, well, why are you investing this versus like, I don't know, like AI for CRM? It may not make sense, it may fail, but you can sell it to your partners and you can sell it to your LPs.
Right.
I mean, look, it's kind of weird, but like it's unfortunately kind of how it works.
No, fully understand that. Mandy, what do you have while we got just a minute here or so?
I guess, Jeff, you and I talked about it, given where we're at, like this is just kind of a starting point and an idea that we do hope to execute in some way. You touched on this a little bit, but just in terms of like our next steps, what would your kind of biggest piece of advice be for us?
There's different ways to basically proceed from now. One of the ways is you basically build a community using online tools. There's online tools that are basically, I mean, you're already starting to do that basically with the Facebook groups and so forth. But basically, so the way Groupon did it in the beginning is he put up a WordPress page, and then he basically put it. He just posted every single post was a coupon, and that WordPress page basically just became the de facto go-to page. Mm-hmm. And then once he kind of knew that people were coming on the site more and more, then he basically invested in actually building the site. So I would basically think about what is the progression. The problem with engineering is it's fairly expensive. Basically, so what is the what is the most amount of consumer versus supply side demand you can basically get that furthers the community while you build the least amount of tech. And then once you basically validate one part of the community or what they basically want, then you basically further invest in the tech. Basically, so I would basically think through those milestones. Basically, so it's like, okay, is it a Facebook group? Is it a landing page? Is it a form software? Basically, like, what can you basically do to basically kind of get the community rolling? Basically, so they have a place to basically gather, and or basically, is there a way to basically outsource something basically and develop something for relatively cheap? Basically, you know, uh, making sure that you basically don't spend that much. Those are kind of my general advice, basically, kind of going forward.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, basically, it's and then yeah, that it's a little bit vague, but unfortunately, it's every team has its case by case.
Right. And at what point, let's say we created a Facebook page or cobbled up enough money for some simplistic app, and at what point from a user number or what other metric would you say, okay, now you're ready to reach out to, whether it's Angel or, bring in somebody to take this, you've proven it up kind of regionally or just locally. At what stage, and I guess it's different for every company, but at what stage do you, reach out to kind of take it to the next level?
Yeah, so nowadays, basically the stages of funding are basically separated between friends and family, which is typically under 250K, 20K to 250K, well, okay, let me, there's actually more stages than that. So depending on the person, basically, it's a friend and family can be like 10K or 20K or 5K, basically, and there's the incubator stage, which is like 16K, 25K, 50K range, 50 to 100K. Basically, it really ranges, basically depending on the incubator, and then there's pre-seed, which is $500,000, and which is pre-seed is actually the true seed now. Seed is actually the Series A, and Series A is actually the Series B. So it's a little bit confusing, but basically, how do I say it? You should be able to build your product basically, at the incubator stage and the friend and family stage, and be able to get some traction. And that traction could be, I don't know, 100K GMV, it could be 200K GMV, 50K GMV. Actually, the number doesn't materially matter, basically, at that stage. Basically, people have to basically figure out, okay, like this has some wheels, basically, like, there seems to be basically, engagement, basically, in this area. The typical things that people basically use is like, day 3 retention of 60%, 70%, DAU, daily active uniques divided by MAU, monthly active uniques of, 0.3, basically. So, but a lot of those numbers don't scale as you go further. So they're just rough, basically rule of thumbs, basically. And so as you basically get to, basically, then you can basically raise 500K approximately. As you get to 2 million, you really need 1 million in GMV. And then as you basically get to Series A, you really basically have to be pushing 3, 5. It's really about growth rate. It's about sustainable growth rate while your retention stays the same.
Right.
Basically. So it has to be growing at, anywhere from 70 to 150% per year, and with a near 90 to 95% retention rate. Basically. So that threshold has been hard to fill. basically, there's not a lot of companies, that can basically hit those metrics at Series A. So, that's why basically, I basically mentioned, basically, think through the business model. So.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, I mean, this has been a great experience, or I guess a great interaction. Definitely appreciate your time. As we mentioned, we know there's huge challenges here, and any help that we can get to kind of focus us on the right things, focus us on making sure we execute as best we can from the start. And again, I mean, the reality is, the end product could be a lot different than what we envision today, or we may quickly learn that there's no real market that we think may or may not exist. So appreciate your time. I don't know what else you have to say, Mandy, but Zhao, definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. The last thing I would basically say is, sometimes in a market you have to iterate one or two or three times, basically. So, as long as you basically know the nature of demand, and then you basically keep on shaping the product. There's one last thing, basically. I have a friend that basically runs a accelerator incubator that are focused on non-technical founders and pairing them with. They basically hired a team internally to basically build prototypes. Basically, and so their thesis is basically matching domain experts. Basically with technical teams. You basically use their resources to basically prove it out or not prove it out, basically, and then that basically helps you raise the subsequent kind of next rounds. Basically, let me. Would you mind if I basically ping him and basically share your deck? Basically to. If you're not comfortable, that's fine, basically, and regardless, basically.
I'm completely fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. I'll see what you basically think, and it's probably worth the chat. So.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Yep. Have a good rest of the day.
You too.
You too.